So you want to create a 3D animated fight scene. You want to make them punch, kick, and just fight like those you've seen in your favorite show or game. This is going to be a step-by-step tutorial series on how to animate a quick fight scene. My name is Cliff, and I have made my own fight animations, and this tutorial series will help you get started. The plan is that at the end of this series, you'll be able to pick up the knowledge and tools necessary to create your own fight animation. To start things off, I have created other fight animation tutorials, which are really overall breakdowns and tips on how to create a fight scene, but the information I have in those videos I will be also breaking down in this series as well. I will be using Autodesk Maya, but the principles taught here can be applied to any program. Also, a big thank you to Autodesk, the sponsor of this series. They wanted to support the channel and they thought that this series would be a nice one that would help a lot of people out there. And if you don't have Maya, you can grab it for free if you're a student, or if you're no longer a student, then there's Maya Indie, which is less than $300 and it's way more affordable than commercial Maya. Link to all that is in the description. This is not a beginner Maya course. I will slow down and explain everything that I'm doing, but I wouldn't consider this a how to learn Maya tutorial. I'm also not planning to go into the advanced features just yet. I really wanted to do something simple that anyone can pick up. There is a Intro to Maya Learning series on the Maya Learning channel that you can watch really quick in order to be able to get the beginner basics enough to follow this tutorial series. Okay, so let's officially get started. I'm going to go to File, Open Scene, and find my character rig. A character rig is what you need in order to move the character in 3D space. This example is an example character from Mixamo. Feel free to use any character rig you can find online and feel comfortable using, but if you're new, the simpler the character, the better. Link to the character that I'm using and some free sites for free models are in the description. Once we click on our character's controls, click E on your keyboard to rotate and a color ball will appear. If you click and drag around this ball, you'll be able to see which controls which part of your character. Fight scenes are about exchange of movement and action, telling a story through these movements. Is this character fast, slow, prefers kicks, or punches? Each character is different and should approach a fight differently. It's something you should keep in mind when creating a fight scene, that your fighters have character as well. A great example is of Eric Jacobus, who does different styles of movements based on the character's imitating. A jab cross will look different on a brawler than it does on a boxer. I will probably be going to a form of a boxer move set, just so you guys get an idea of how I'm approaching this. So the next thing in Maya we need to do is create a character set. A character set will keep our animation data into one place, and you'll see later when we're adjusting our timing why we need to do so. We're going to go to the top that says Key, Character Set, Option Box, and name your character set. You're going to want to select all keyable under here. I forgot to adjust it from my last animation file, so don't mind that. Select all keyable and select Create Character Set when you're done. Nothing changes except in the bottom here, you'll see that your character set will be selected. Now to give the scene a bit of environment. We're going to create a simple floor because right now there is nothing under his feet, so that when we place his feet or move the character, you want it to feel as if there's a ground there versus nothing. So I'm going to go onto the shelf here, select Poly Modeling, select this square, and that's going to create a plane. You probably may not be able to see because it's so small, but once I go into my attribute editor, I'm going to select the scale and increase it to 100. It's still a little bit too small, especially when I have the character moving, so I'm going to increase it then to 1000. And from then on, now you see that if I move my character up and down, it now looks like he's going through the floor versus before where he was just in the air in 3D space. Even if you rotate the camera and you look under the floor, you see that you can't see the character. So now that we have it in place, we're going to go ahead and make it easier because I am going to be using the controls on his feet to move the character, and I don't necessarily want to be bothered by clicking the floor. So I'm going to go up to my shelf and clicking the same type of icon, but it's going to be blue like the plane, and deselect the option to select the model. So what that does is that now with that deselected, I can still select my character, but I cannot select the floor. So if I want to go ahead and select the floor again for any reason, I can go up and unclick that button. So therefore I can move it, but until then I'm gonna keep it unclicked and going right into animating the character. So with the character selected, I'm like to also have auto keyframe toggled. So on the bottom right here, this circle, this icon here, will be able to go ahead and create my own keyframes. So when I move my character, a key will be set on the timeline to keep that animation data in place. I'm going to switch my animation to 24 frames per second. And finally, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I have my reference pose here of the boxer in the boxing stance. So I'm just going to go ahead and create my character and put him in the pose that the boxer is in. So when I select the character, I'm going to go ahead and use the move and rotate tool. The move tool is with the hotkey of W. And once I switch back between W and E, I'm able to go ahead and move the character to start to get him into the stance. I am also going to be moving around a lot. So in order to go ahead and have one camera in place and the other camera where I can move it, I'm going to go ahead and select an extra screen just to make it easier for myself. And this is just my personal workflow that I'm used to. If you prefer to have it where you're just watching the one screen, that's fine. But if you want to follow along to the workflow that I personally do it, I go to panels, layouts, 2 panels side by side. So it separates into 2 panels where I can go ahead and see the character in full on one side. If I want to move around the character on the other side, I can. I'm also going to go ahead and deselect everything and then reselect only the polygons so I only can see the character here when I'm moving it around. I don't see necessarily anything else. But because it's only one camera, the perspective cam, when I move one side, the other one moves too. So I'm going to go ahead and create another camera. I'm going to go ahead up to the shelf here, select on rendering, and create this camera here that's very small. So when I go to you can still see it on one side because it's hidden on the other one. I'm going to go to the right on my attributes, increase it to 100 so you can see the character. But because I want to be able to see the character on one side, then the other for a different camera, I'm going to go to the panels, select camera 1, and you'll be able to see the left has camera 1 where the right has perspective. So I can move around now without having the other character move. So I can kind of, start to put some of the poses in place, and this character, I can see the full view. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and continue posing, the character here. When we're creating fight scenes, we would need to have a general understanding on how the bodies move, right? So knowing how to position the body's parts to create poses, because when it comes to animation, it's technically a sequence of poses that place together to form an animation. So the better and stronger and more accurate the poses are, the better the animation. So I'm going to do my best to go ahead and match the character to the pose the best way I possibly can. There is some benefit into knowing martial arts and knowing boxing yourself. Like if you want to be able to, reference yourself instead of looking online for reference, that's there's a general good idea. Like I said before, the poses, the better the poses, the better the animation will be. But if you're aware that, okay, the toes here need to be squared off, being able to keep the toes or the feet shoulder width apart or slightly wider than shoulder width apart, depending on what type of character you have, there is a benefit there. Feel free to mess around and really get into your poses, really trying to create, the best possible pose that you can. There are also different types of controls called IK and FK. You'll see that the way the feet move aren't necessarily the same of the way that the arms move, which I'll get into in another video. But for right now, just animate the character the way you have him here to get into the pose, his ready fight pose. I'm not going to mess with the fingers as of yet. Right now, I'm going to go into the other arm and going to move the arms into the position similar enough where he's into the pose. So I'm going to keep adjusting back and forth between the two arms just to kind of really fine tune and really make sure we have it close to, close to the pose or close to a nice enough pose as possible. So even though I'm looking at a reference and even though I am trying to get to the reference as good as possible, I'm also looking at my character. And if I feel that it looks a little weird or a little wonky based on the reference, this is why I keep moving the camera. I'm also going to just adjust based on what I personally think looked good. So, which is why I'm just kind of moving around, trying to get a good position for the character to be in that fight stance. So it looks pretty good. Maybe the knee could be brought out a little bit more. So I'm going to bring out the knee here, adjust the foot so it's a little bit more flat. You can go ahead and, get really, really into it and get really, really technical with the poses, so the more time you spend on it is it's pretty good, but, have fun with it. So now with this particular character in Mixamo, this control here, this triangle control, controls the fingers at once. So I would be able to go ahead and select all these controls, so click and select, and then just middle mouse drag to be able to adjust the fingers into a fight pose. You can use the controls on the fingers if you want. It is a lot better if you can go ahead and skip right to it. Most characters in Maya at least have some sort of control like this. If you have any other program, you may have to do it individually, depending on the rig or whoever has set this up. Now that I have done it, I still kind of feel like the arms are a little bit weird. That the thumb is a little bit weird. I don't necessarily see any controls to adjust it. I could be blind and it's right in front of my face and I can't see it. If I do the curl, it doesn't look like there's any other options, but it's not a make it or break it, or it's going to adjust the animation. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to adjust the hands a little bit to go ahead and just kind of bring them in. And I click the space bar to open up that one camera. And there you go, I have it. I'm going to check the pose around the character to make sure it looks good. It looks good. He's ready to go ahead and get into his first little fight here. All right, so I'm going to click the space bar again, and what that does, it brings back the last view, which is going to be the camera on one side and the viewport that I'm using on the other. So now that we have the character here selected, what I'm going to do is select S on my keyboard to save the keyframe. Now, if you look at your timeline there, you're going to see a red line on the number 1, and what that does is that it's giving you an indication that there is now a key there for that frame. Because we have the character set selected, it's going to do a key for all the controls that was selected when you made the character set. So now, because everything was selected, you press S on the keyboard, the entire character went ahead and has a keyframe on the timeline. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move to a different time on the timeline. Make sure it's very, very important that you move to a different time on the timeline. Why? Is because if you start to move the character on the same key, it's just going to overwrite everything you did already. So make sure you move to a different time on the timeline. And then now from here, I'm going to click 5. I like, even numbers, 5, 10, 15. So I'm going to go ahead and select another key to be on number 5. And then once we selected our keys, or once we have our keys down, then we're going to adjust the animation for time. But I go ahead and I put my keys down every 5 frames. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into the second pose. It's going to be the anticipation pose to the punch. Now, I'm going to have my reference here of the next pose in order for him to move into, and just start moving the character. Now, because we have a different frame for it, we're on frame 5, any new animation data that's being saved will be saved onto the new frame. So you can go ahead and just keep making the changes that go ahead and match the character to the reference photo. So I like to start with the feet and the lower body first before making my way up to the upper arms. And you can kind of do it at your own pace, or, just as you can. The closer it is to the reference, of course, the stronger the pose may be. But, like I said earlier, I like to go ahead and make the changes to make it as dynamic or as interesting as possible. something to note is when you're looking at the references, you'll see that especially when it comes to at least this type of punch, the body kind of leans in to prep the weight of the momentum from the bottom up, right? So it's not like you're leading in with the punch, right? The next thing you're gonna do is sort of have the body kind of get ready and build the momentum up for the punch. And once we kind of have it kind of set up here, we're pretty much good. So I'm going to go ahead, look at the model here a little bit, kind of make sure that everything kind of looks, just where it needs to be, make any final adjustments. But if you kind of scroll back and forth between the two frames, you'll see that the character kind of starts to move into place there, right? It starts to move into the second pose. So all the keys are saved onto the frame 5, and the keys from frame 1 goes ahead and transitions it from one pose to the other. Now we're gonna go ahead and jump into our next pose and jump onto frame 10, and we're gonna go ahead and make those final changes and make the last pose, which is going to be the punch pose, adjusting his feet, getting the feet to really be facing forward completely, getting his body sort of fully thrown forward in order to go ahead and make the punch as believable as possible. If you have these controls here, there's going to be, most rigs come with this. Here it's in the attribute editor, but you're going to also want to have to make the pose there for the foot kind of rolled up so it looks like he's on his toes. There's a little bit of jitteriness happening with his feet, which I'm going to fix in a little bit, but I'm going to continue going, really rotating that torso, really throwing that shoulder into the punch, and really making sure that the weight of the punch is coming completely towards the arm there. Let's move his head, looking, so he looks at his opponent while he's throwing the punch. Let's move the left arm back a little bit. And I'm going for a very simple, basic punch here. Just bring the arms up. All right, so now that we have the pose there for frame 10, we see that he has a punch there. Now the animation has changed, and what I had forgotten to do was press S on the keyboard and save the animation data on frame 5, and instead of going back. But what happens is, in short, is that any control that wasn't moved didn't save the data, which we can go back and adjust. It's not that big of a deal. So I'm gonna go back in and just bring my arm up forward. I think he has a little bit more of a momentum in this than he did in his first pose, but it still looks pretty good. We just got to make sure that we press S now on the other two poses, just to make sure it stays in frame. All right, so now that he has the 3 poses, I'm pretty happy with, right? So the pose 1, pose 2, and pose 3, I'm very, very happy with. I think the anticipation of it is good, but because the computer is interpolating what the movement should be towards each frame, then it gets kind of wonky, seeing the arm come down all the way to go forward for that punch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight these keys, and I'm going to go ahead and change the tangents to stepped, and changing the 10 to stepped, we'll go ahead and just focus on the 3 keys that we have. And this is what we call blocking, right? Anytime you see any animation in this type of sets, it's blocking. We're putting on a key poses. We don't necessarily want to confuse ourselves with what the computer makes it look like. So the blocking pose will give us an idea exactly of how it looks like with just the key poses. I'm also going to go ahead and change the interpolation of the animation keys. Sometimes when you see the little bit of shifting of the controls from the foot and the on the controls, what I like to do is go ahead and go into the preferences tab here, go to the animation settings, change the evaluation from parallel to DG, and then from then on it won't happen. I'm not too sure why this happens. I'm sure there's some documentation online to go ahead and explain it, but I've noticed that when I change it from back and forth, it goes ahead and makes it a little bit easier to go ahead and see. And then from then on, you see the 3 poses. You have your ready stance, your anticipation pose, and then the final punch pose to kind of give an idea of exactly what this character is doing. Now, what you see also here is how even the poses are, right? The anticipation is on frame 5 and then the punch is on 10. So it kind of gives it a very, linear type of spacing in between each 2. There's really no time for buildup, and it's not necessarily like the character waits too long or is very quick with this punch. It's a very, pose, right? So what we can do with the timeline is that we can go ahead and change the keys on the timeline. If I go ahead and select it and drag and middle mouse drag the keys, I can go ahead and make that pose a little bit quicker, right? So you see that now it feels like a much more of a quicker punch, even though the poses kind of work with it being a quicker punch. It kind of works, right? So you see that instead of it being like a 1, 2, 3, it's 1, 2, 3, So I like it. I like the speed of it. It's a much more of a quicker punch. And while we're in the blocking stage, we can go ahead and kind of adjust the frames, right? We can adjust the frames to kind of give it a sense of timing. If I want to make it a little bit, longer, if I want to go ahead and accentuate the punch, let me go ahead and try to move the anticipation pose to frame 9, the punch pose to frame 16, and even then, right, you kind of have like that 1, 2, 3, right? So you kind of build the anticipation a little bit more with it, but I really feel like I want to push that anticipation pose a little bit more. So let's go ahead and really move the final pose out way later, right? So I'm moving all the way to 23, right? Even then, that looks good, right? So now you really feel like this character is powering up for that punch. So we could even, if we needed to, we could adjust that pose if this is the type of time we're going for to really look like he's powering up for that punch. You would need to make it a little bit later. Then it's like, ooh, it really winds up and it really, delivers that punch. And I really, like the way that it feels also when you go ahead and letting it wind up a little bit more to go ahead and give a little bit more weight to that punch. So take a chance, see how you like your punches, see if you like it, medium, short, or long. What I'm going to do is I'm probably going to bring it back to a medium pose, maybe a little bit quicker. Let's see. Let's try 4 and 7. Yeah, I think 4 and 7 looks good, right? It gives a little bit of anticipation while having a little bit of a quick release. So from now, I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do the last few poses, right, to go ahead and bring it back. He's going to throw the punch in and come back to his original stance. So what I'm going to do is going to go on frame 1. I'm going to go to select the character. I'm going to middle mouse drag frame 1 to a separate frame. Like I'm going to choose 15, and then I'm going to select S on the keyframe to select keys. And what that happens is that since we're still clicking on the character set, any pose, the pose from frame 1 or whatever frame you selected will go ahead and be copied into the next pose. It's almost like you're just dragging it, you place it to that frame, you press S, and then it goes ahead and saves that pose there. Now, because it kind of looks like it kind of, he lunges into it and kind of jumps back, we're still needing one additional pose to kind of bring him back into that that stance, right? It looks like he kind of like punches it and then shifts back really quick. So what we're going to do is add an additional pose between 7 and 15. So I'm going to put one at 11. I'm going to also copy the pose from frame 4, right? So it kind of gives it a little bit of a, okay, well, he punches it and he goes right back. So it's like forward and then reverse, right? I'm also going to make sure that it's stepped. I think the stepped is on the first few keys. I want to make sure it's on all the keys. So now the only thing is that you're not going to be winding up your punch once you finish it, right? Your arm is going to, you just had your momentum come out of the punch. You're not going to bring it all the way back. So your posing, while similar, is going to be different. So I'm going to bring the arm down and I'm going to shift my weight instead of forward is back, right? So the character now, after he's finished the pose, now it's time to go ahead and lean back. He's going to move with his body first to go backwards, not with his leg first. So I'm going to have that character move back a little bit, and you'll see that between 4 and 11, while similar poses, one has that forward momentum, the other has the more of a reversing momentum into the other pose. Let's shorten on the timeline here. So if I go ahead and press play, you'll see that he has a little bit more of a, okay, punch and then step back, right? That's a much more of a believable sequence there, right? So he shifts into the punch and then he steps back. We could go ahead and adjust a little bit more. I think that I probably could have left the foot in the pivoted stance there a little bit, but I think it looks good. I think it looks good from where it is. And there you have it. Your character has now delivered its first punch. Let's go ahead and press the space bar to go ahead and look at it in full view. And you have your first animation here. So I hope you guys really, like the animation that you came up with. We're going to go ahead and continue on into other forms of the animation. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to flesh out the frames a little bit, add some more keyframes in between, and while we start to build out our combo. All right, thanks for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you guys in the next video.